The Democrats are outnumbered in the state legislature. In the last election, they lost all of the statewide races. What can they do to win? It's a question we're posing to a Democratic politician coming up on To the Point right after Meet the Press.
Now, To the Point with your host, News Channel 5's Kelly Dunn.
The Republicans control both houses of the state legislature. They've won the governor's office and all the cabinet posts. Now, President Obama is falling in the polls in Florida. Is this a lonely time to be a liberal Democrat in Florida?
Good morning and welcome. These are not the best of days for Democrats in Florida. In the last election, they lost all statewide races. Next year at this time, we'll be in the height of campaign season. Will it be any different? And what will it take for the Democrats to become competitive? Our guest is one of the few liberal Democrats holding office right now, State Representative Mark Pafford, who was first elected back in 2008. Thank you very much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
Let's get to the point, Representative. Why are Democrats having such a tough time winning elections in this state?
Well, in this state, I think it's a number of issues, but obviously it goes back 10 years from this point when we had redistricting last. And there was districts were drawn to basically enable the Republicans to maintain power, and they've done a very, very good job of that.
Well, and redistricting is happening again.
That's correct.
What are your anticipations as we head into more redistricting in this state?
Yeah, I think ultimately the Supreme Court will determine the boundaries of the districts that are going to be drawn. But, you know, I mean, there will be your normal politicking that occurs. The Democrats were just as guilty for something like 140 years in this state. So Amendments 5 and 6 that passed in 2010, I think, will be very helpful.
Is that going to have a direct impact on your district?
Oh, yeah, all of them. It's kind of like a domino effect.
So what does that mean for you and your political future?
Look, you know, draw the district, and that's run. It's Palm Beach County. I'm a Democrat. Palm Beach County is a good county to be in if you are a Democrat. Other places throughout the state may not be as good.
The only other statewide elected Democrat is Senator Bill Nelson. Are you concerned at all that this could one day become a one-party state?
I don't think so. I think the atmosphere right now in the state of Florida, it really is a Tea Party. I think the Republican primary is generally in charge of most of the policy that we develop as a state. I think once the primary ends, then you're going to have more clear races. You're going to know exactly who the Republican is, how far to the right that they went, and certainly in terms of the Democrats, you're going to know who they are, and hopefully it'll be a very clear difference.
Well, and that is true. The Republicans are definitely growing with the addition of the Tea Party. So what about the Democrats? How can they have that kind of growth?
Well, I think it's going to come to common sense. The voters are going to pick up all the nuances. I mean, in this state, when you look at the Tea Party agenda and the movement, if you will, it's extremely conservative. You know, you've got a governor who, when I questioned his staff in a committee meeting, basically said if you're a medically needy service, they would prefer you find a charity to take care of that. And I'm talking a kidney transplant. I think once those clear definitions are understood in a general type of election, the voters are going to, I think, have a lot of common sense and vote for the person that best represents them.
Elaborate more on that, though, and finding a charity for that sort of
medical. It was a pretty simple question I asked because they said charitable or a contribution from a nonprofit agency when I asked about medically needy types of services. This is for very, very poor people who don't necessarily meet a Medicaid type of definition. And I'm talking kidney transplant, something extremely important that may kill somebody. And the governor's representative in 2010 said, and it's on tape, no, we prefer that they look at charitable type of services, which to me is just shocking.
Let's talk nationally. You supported Barack Obama running for president in 2008. Take a look at this. In the latest Quinnipiac University poll, Florida voters were asked if President Obama deserves to be reelected. And more than half, 53%, said he does not deserve to be reelected. What do you think the president can do to try to turn things around?
Well, you know, look, we're over a year away. I think historically, the last 5 presidential elections, 32 million Floridians have turned out to vote. In each of those elections, between the major parties, there's only been about a 50,000 vote difference. So there's a lot of time. And again, going back to the point I made just a minute ago, once a clear Republican rises above the rest of the field, you're going to have a very, very, big, easy decision to make, in my opinion.
Yeah, it'll be more black and white. Right now, you've got, there are a lot of people that are obviously still in the hunt.
Absolutely.
You were one of the organizers for Awake the State, and that was the protests against the Governor Scott's budget. Were they effective, and do you plan to do any of these again?
Absolutely. There's here's the game. And if people watch and don't know this, they should. The game is we go take votes, in this case 420 miles away. We raise as much money that we can to tell you, the person that opens up in the mail, how great a person you are. Accountability is so important in the democratic process, and I certainly invite that by being part of Awake the State and by being so open about vote histories, legislation. I think it's imperative, if you do represent a district and over 150,000 people in a district, that you make yourself available. And if at the end of the day people don't agree with you, you lose. Hopefully you're doing a good enough job and you're connected to the people and you're not allowing the lobbyists' cash to influence your decisions, and you're making public policy choices as opposed to political policy choices.
You are connected to the people in your district, and what are you hearing from them? What are the messages they want you to then be taking back to Tallahassee?
Well, I live in just outside of Haverhill, unincorporated Palm Beach County, and my neighbors are always very happy to talk to me about the issues.
I'm sure.
And, health insurance is huge, just maintaining your house, putting food on the table. And then, I have a daughter at UCF, and I have a son who's in high school. Just those costs in terms of educating your youngster or your college student, they're really upsetting what we see as a middle class, and the middle class is slipping away, and I feel it's my job to speak up for those people in the middle class.
And what more can the state do for our middle class that it's not doing right now?
I think the biggest thing the state can do is have a mature conversation, and I mean put all the rhetoric aside. If you signed a contract that says you're not going to mention the tax word, you're not doing a service to anybody. We need to reform the tax system in the state of Florida to represent a system that provides stability for business, because right now we base our tax revenue on 2 general lines of revenue, sales tax and property tax. As soon as the national economy takes a dip, we crash. We're one of the few to get back up early. And so Florida really has to create a system that has varied revenue streams, that creates stability, but also that taxes people fairly. We don't have intangibles tax. $2 billion for the last 12 years has been lost.
What hope is there that things will turn around to the point where it will make a difference, though, in everybody's daily lives? I think a lot of times there's some big ideas in Washington and Tallahassee, and I think a lot of times people feel like, well, I'm still getting squeezed. It's still not filtering down to me. I mean, so definitely, some kind of a fair tax system certainly would help. But what else?
Well, in addition to the tax system and finding the dollars to take care of the most vulnerable people in the state of Florida, 20,000 people are waiting on services for disabilities, as an example. 50,000 unduplicated for senior services. I think we have to get the numbers in the House and the Senate closer. If you're listening to this, you think, okay, he's a Democrat, he's not happy. The super minority. Well, let me tell you something. There's a lot of Republicans in the state legislature who I get along very, very well with. We've done a lot of great things over the last 3 years that also don't have that voice. The more people that come together to actually debate issues, the better the policy end result's going to be. And I think, to answer your question, the average resident in Florida is going to benefit from.
Exactly. Do you have high hopes for the state of Florida turning things around? I mean, the jobs plan the governor has, the 700,000 over 7 years and that sort of thing. I mean, how optimistic are you about our future, and under this Republican governor especially?
Well, look, Rick Scott represents the Tea Party well, and you know what? He is a very honest person when it comes to what he said he would do. He is doing exactly what the Tea Party asked him to do. And I think there's some good in that because it does allow people to understand the difference between a Rick Scott and a Mark Pafford. I actually am pretty optimistic. I think we can only go so far before we find some balance in the chambers that provides some check and balance and some negotiation that occurs with the executive branch of the state of Florida, the governor's office, and both chambers. I'm fairly optimistic.
Well, there's already talk of Charlie Crist possibly running for governor as a Democrat. Think that's a good move?
Well, he can do what he wants. I mean, you're talking about a guy who spent 26 years as a Republican and ran against Bob Graham in a U.S. Senate race. So, you know, I'm going to hopefully sit back and watch some folks run that are Democrats. Certainly, you know, he did very well in the last 6 months of his term as governor. So we'll see what happens.
There's a lot of see what happens.
Yeah, there is.
A lot.
I'm smiling, so.
That's a good thing. Well, thank you very much, State Representative Mark Pafford, for joining us today. We appreciate it, and I know you've been a viewer of To The Point. We're glad you're out there. Thank you very much.
Every Sunday. Thank you.
All right. And still to come today, it looks to be an interesting year, and we will be watching. Stay tuned. Coming up next, our Roundtable examines the Republican straw poll and the outlook for the Florida primary. And now for our Roundtable with News Channel 5 political analyst and coordinator of the American Studies program at Lynn University, Dr. Robert Watson, and Brian Crowley, author of CrowleyPoliticalReport.com. Thanks, guys, for being here today.
Good morning.
First, some comments about what State Representative Pafford had to say. Brian, we'll start with you.
Well, in Florida, it's been a tough decade for Democrats. And, you know, the good news for Democrats is that people like Mark Pafford and others who are in, you know, the younger generation of Democrats, they're really the building blocks for the future of the Democratic Party in this state. You know, Bill Nelson, who's going to be in a tough fight to win another term, you know, he turns 69 this week, next week, you know, and that generation of Democrats are moving on, and then the Democratic Party really needs to build a good farm team for future elections.
It absolutely does. I think that if Karen Thurman and some of the previous Democratic chairs have done an anemic job of building an on-deck or, you know, a pool of the next generation. Pafford's a young guy, and he's the future. You know, Florida has been fortunate to have your Clay Shaws, Republican Clay Shaw, Bob Graham, really honorable folks who were in this for the right reason, were centrist, reached out. But then we also are fortunate to have people like Pafford. The guy has integrity. What you hear among anyone, whether they agree with him or they don't agree with him, he speaks his mind. He's not bought. He's his own person. He's a smart fellow. He's a real good example of the, I think, what Graham and Shaw were. A good public servant.
You know, and the Republicans 20 years ago faced the same problem where they were trying to build their farm team, and they were bringing in young guys who became the party leaders that you've seen over the last 10 years. And the Democrats are in the same position Republicans were once in.
In our area, you know, from Ted Deutsch to Lori Berman to Pafford, there's a lot of sort of the next generation of Democrats coming up, which is one of the few bright spots
for Democrats
statewide.
All right, let's move on to the Florida presidential straw poll. Many were saying that the big winner would have a big advantage in Florida, but not many were predicting that Herman Cain would come out on top. He got more votes than Texas Governor Rick Perry, who came in a distant second. Former Massachusetts Governor Mitt Romney came in third, and Romney and Perry combined did not get as many votes as Cain. So what kind of an effect is this going to have on our primary?
You know, when I was writing for Crowley Political Report, one of the things that I was talking about, a good plug for the Crowley Political Report, Crowley Political Report, is that, you know, what is the Florida Republican Party today? You know, we see increasing signs that what the Florida Republican Party is the Florida Tea Party. You know, Rick Scott has spent an awful lot of time helping out and talking to the Florida Tea Party. Marco Rubio got his start in that U.S. Senate race with the help of the Florida Tea Party. You know, Herman Cain's showing 37% of the vote compared to 15 and 14 for Perry and Romney. You know, suggests that's the direction that the Florida Republican Party is going in. It really does beg the question today, is it the Florida Republican Party or the Florida Tea Party?
I agree with Brian, and it's also very late in the game. We're only a few months out from the first primaries.
Right.
And if you look at this historically, this is sort of symptomatic of the Democratic Party. The Democrats were the ones forming a circular firing squad and bickering. The Republicans historically have tended to circle the wagons around a front runner. And also, if you look at it in this respect, I looked up some of the same early poll. Reagan won this same early poll and then won the nomination. Dole in '96 and won the nomination. Bush won in '88. So this poll is not to be dismissed. You can say, yes, it's awfully early. Is it a fluke? But the people that have won this historically have won the nomination. I think it points to the fact that, as Brian said, the party, one, I think is in disarray. Two, it's not happy with any of the slate of candidates. And three, the political center of the Republican Party has drifted over. The Tea Party's calling the shots right now.
And how does the primary on January 31st change things?
You mean just moving the date?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, New Hampshire and Iowa are already having a big hissy fit about this change. New Hampshire has it in their state law that they have to have their primary 7 days before any other similar contest, and they kind of have this handshake agreement with Iowa that as long as they call it a caucus yeah. they can go first. But also within their state law is they allow their Secretary of State to pick the date anytime he wants. So he keeps his cards close to his chest, and he'll wait till all the other states have finally played out, and then he'll pick a date. And they don't care about the October 1st deadline for picking a date. They'll violate whatever rule. They'll send out their own army to make sure that they are the first in the nation primary.
This has been going on for 8 decades-ish, and if you remember back in 2008 when Florida also tried to move up and was penalized for doing so, New Hampshire even threatened to go into January all the way up into December, which is absurd, and then everybody starts front-loading. Here's what it means. What it means is as more and more states move forward, what we call front-loading, it means the candidates are going to have to raise more and more and more money early to do that, so the power of money. Secondly, instead of that good old-fashioned retail politics where they press the flesh and we have time each week to look at this state and that state, it means that by middle of February, the end of February, this thing's all to be over. So instead of retail politics, they're going to be doing wholesale politics with 30-second commercials, which costs even more money. The voters lose, I think, either way.
Becomes all about the money.
That's my take.
Another candidate was a winner in the Republican straw poll, but did not get as much attention. We'll be talking about that after this. While the presidential candidates got the attention at last week's Florida Republican straw poll, there was another winner. Adam Hasner was the straw poll victor in the Senate race. He was on our show in June talking about his campaign. Coming in second in that straw poll, Mike McAllister, who, by the way, will be our guest next week on To the Point. So what did we make of Hasner's showing?
Well, I think that Adam Hasner has worked really, really hard to play to the hard right Tea Party type of voter. And so it's not surprising that he would do well among that group of voters. And neither is it surprising that George Lemieux would do fairly poorly among that group of voters. McAllister remains a bit of a surprise, but he sort of comes in that same Herman Cain syndrome that we've seen. And whether or not they'll still, the Herman Cains and the Mike McAllisters will still be able to hold on to that kind of a vote come the August primary. We don't know that yet, but McAllister's very impressive to a lot of the Tea Party people.
I agree with Brian again, but I think there's something going on here. Not only, as we said in the earlier segment, the entire Republican Party has drifted into the fold here in Florida of the Tea Party, which means they could shoot themselves in the foot in the general election. Primary election and general election, this is apples and oranges. But there's something going on here when George Lemieux, who probably has the best chance of beating Nelson, comes in a paltry and distant third. And I would tie this in that with Herman Cain winning the presidential straw poll, the Republicans don't seem to know what they want here other than drifting to the right. And if you tie this in with, just recently we had a debate in Tampa and a debate in Orlando. The debates were highlighted, if that's the correct word, of the question, what if somebody is ready to die and can't afford insurance? Should we let them die? The audience applauded, and applauded as if it was the Super Bowl.
Some of the audience.
Well, but it was pretty vocal, though. It wasn't 2 or 3. It wasn't isolated, and the candidates didn't call them out on it. Then you turn around with the other debate in Orlando, and you have a member of the U.S. military who happens to be gay and made a comment, and he gets hissed and booed. We're booing someone in uniform. Something's happening to the Republican Party here in Florida, which the Democrats, you talk about, they should be able to make lemonade out of the lemon that they've been given. But of course, we're talking to Democrats here. Will they be able to do that? Remains to be seen. But the Republicans seem to be doing everything they can to self-destruct. But the Democrats simply can't make any traction here in Florida.
Well, I think that there are probably leaders within the Republican Party that are are torn about what to do with this. I mean, the Tea Party activists seem to be the folks that are in control now, and those may likely be the people that are going to help decide who wins, especially in the presidential primary in Florida. So I think moderates in the Republican Party are kind of torn between this idea, how much do you pander to the Tea Party element, these people that do these cheers that I'm assure you probably upset many moderate Republicans as well. And they don't quite know how to deal with this because, frankly, a lot of moderate Republicans are not the kind of people that are going to show up at the polls. It's always the activists in every election cycle in the presidential primary who show up.
But those people are going to show up in the general election, and if the party has put its flag way over there, it allows the Democrats to move their flag to the center if the Democrats can only get their act together.
All right, coming up in just a moment, we're going to take a moment to remember a unique Florida politician. Florida said goodbye to a former governor just this week.
Last week, you know, Governor Claude Kirk, who was governor from 1967 to 1971, passed away at the age of 85. He was flamboyant, and back in 1998, he liked to wear hats. I got a note from Claude Kirk that's from the desk of Governor Claude Kirk. I hope you will bring to bear all your powers of the pen to cause all your readers to seek the return of my state property. Last seen in the Bear Island development, or perhaps it stayed on my car's roof until Village Road. Thank you for sounding your trumpet. Claude Kirk always had a good self-deprecating humor, and but he really dearly wanted that hat back.
First Republican elected since Reconstruction.
That's right.
And on Richard Nixon's shortlist for vice president at one point. So one of the big names in Florida political history.
Yeah, and passed away right here in West Palm Beach, fondly remembered by a lot of people in this area. Thank you very much, Robert, Brian, for being with us today. Thank you for joining us. Have a great Sunday. We'll see you next week.